Warning. The radio broadcast you're about to hear was made by men and for men. It may at times seem a little rough around the edges, brash, and certainly not canonically approved by papal authority. But its content may indeed challenge you to become the man, father, husband God has called you to be. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to another week of The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy. So glad you are here. We are once again set up in the Carolina Catholic Radio Network studio on North Tryon in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is always a treat to come into these hallowed walls that have seen so much radio over the years. And we are going to get into some interesting conversation. Over the past several weeks, we have been discussing the traditional Latin Mass and the restrictions coming down from Pope Francis, and most recently, the cancellation of the Triduum, the traditional Triduum in the Diocese of Charlotte. So we have been talking about a lot of different controversies and issues. We've gone back to Vatican II, and this week we are going to maybe get into some of the details of the distinguishments between the so-called Novus Ordo Mass and the traditional Latin Mass. Joining me today is a friend of mine for over 25 years, which I cannot believe it's been that long. He is very involved in the traditional Latin Mass movement for over 40 years. He's been involved with the Society of St. Pius X in the Charlotte Chapel since 1981. He was previously a project manager with IBM for over 30 years, and he's also a co-host of Welcome to Tradition podcast on YouTube. Locally, he has been known for a few singing events, going back to Zarelli's, which is an Italian restaurant on South Boulevard. He used to sing at Zarelli's. Also, the chorus of the Charlotte Opera, right, where many might have heard that wonderful voice, which is resounded through Charlotte. So without further ado, I'd like to bring on my good friend, Jim DePiante. Jim, how are you today?
Jason, glad to be here, bud.
That's awesome. So glad to be here. Wow, such wild circumstances. The last time we kind of ran in was at a mutual friend's funeral. Right. I've spoken about her many times on this show, Miss Virginia McMahon, who was responsible, her and her family, for introducing me to the traditional Latin Mass, without which I would probably not be sitting in this seat right now. So, we were there for her funeral out at St. Anthony's a few months back. And we connected and shared a few stories about what's going on with the restrictions of the Latin Mass, and here we are today. So, Jim, I appreciate you again being here, and
my pleasure.
Would maybe like to get into it. I know you're a faithful Catholic here in the diocese. You have 5 kids, and were raised in the context of the traditional faith and sacraments. Tell us a little bit about how that all got started. Your walk in the traditional faith.
Well, of course, I didn't find it. I was born into it. I'm a boomer, typical Catholic boomer kid. I went to Catholic elementary school in the beginning of the 60s. And as typically happened after the year after I made my first communion, I learned to serve the traditional Latin Mass. That was the only Mass there was at the time. That was in the fall of 1964. I didn't actually serve Mass until 25 years later. I had learned to serve the traditional Latin Mass, but then didn't. And the reason I didn't, so I learned to serve in September, October, November of 1964. On November 29th, 1964, that would have been the first Sunday of Advent, the world moved out from under me. When my family went to Mass that Sunday, like we always went to Mass, everything was different. The altar had been moved away from the wall. The priest was facing backwards. The prayers at the foot of the altar, which I had really struggled to learn, were gone.
Yeah, I think
and most of what we heard, almost everything we heard, was in English. That was a really strange thing. There was a commentator. It was typically a nun doing play-by-play, explaining what was going on at the Mass. There were a lot of other differences, but these were the substantial differences. My mother had had a very solid Catholic education. And when she saw this, she said, there's something There's something wrong with this. But she's no theologian. She's no ecclesiologist. She's no sacramental theologian. She just knew something was not right and began to resist it immediately, which, as you might imagine, created some serious problems for her with our diocese. By then, we had not been yet in the Diocese of Charlotte. For roughly a decade subsequently, my parents sought, and I with them, obviously, the traditional Mass. And it became harder and harder to find. There were some few priests who resisted the implementation of first the 64, then the 65, then the 69 missals. Come 1973, we moved to Charlotte, and what I'm going to characterize as the New Order juggernaut moved through Charlotte, and it became very clear that there was no place for the traditional Latin Mass in Charlotte anymore. So certain families, mine among them, would gather together and read the prayers of the traditional Mass in each other's homes, or they would frequently travel to Chapel Hill or Raleigh or Goldsboro or even Vienna, Virginia, to find priests who would say the Mass for them. In the late 1970s, an 80-year-old retired priest, Monsignor Gable, got permission from then Bishop Begley to say the Latin Mass. This was interesting. It was at Our Lady of Consolation, which was the only officially black church in the city of Charlotte. I'm not sure what came of Consolation.
It stayed. It still
it's
is.
Still there.
Yeah,
all right.
Still there.
So he said, Monsignor Gable said the Mass there, which was interesting. This little passel of very white people showing up at Our Lady of Consolation once a week for the Mass, and he did that until he died. Then another retired priest, Monsignor Gilbert, was given permission to say the Mass. Seeing that this was a going out of business strategy, getting old priests who were dying, they got in touch with the Society of St. Pius X, understanding that the Society of St. Pius X was founded precisely to preserve the traditional Latin Mass.
So real quick, though, during this period of time, it was obviously a drastic change from the old rite to the new rite. I mean, it was like next Sunday you walked in and it was
just completely different. And then it changed further.
And then how'd the abuses start to roll in? Because there was a lot of abuses. I mean, we've heard about the clown masses and the musical masses and the dancing offertory girls. Was that later on?
That was a 70s phenomenon.
Okay.
So once this rolled out in the mid-70s, this is what we began to see, and this is why we said we cannot have anything to do with this.
Yeah.
And it really ramped up in the early 80s. Yeah, pretty much mid to late 70s, the early 80s. The 70s is when churches' statues were being destroyed and communion rails were being ripped out. And
So imagine initially it's just the shock of a new liturgy, and it was pretty quick that the abuses of even that liturgy immediately
crept in.
It just opened the doors for it.
There were abuses even in the 60s, with unleavened loaves of bread being served up at youth masses and the whole thing. Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
So my folks got in touch with the Society of St. Pius X, and on Ash Wednesday of 1980, a priest from the Society of St. Pius X said Mass in Charlotte for the first time, and he used old Monsignor Gilbert's own chalice to say that Mass.
So when would you say the society really got off the ground? I mean, at what point did they kind of recognize
1981.
81.
The society itself was founded in 1970.
Okay.
But they had no presence to speak of in the United States. Very slow, gradual adoption in the United States, and they didn't get into North Carolina until 1980 and 81. 1980 in the Greensboro or Raleigh area, and then 1981 in Charlotte. But the first Mass was Ash Wednesday, 1980. In 1981, a priest began to come monthly, funded by this group of Catholics, and they founded St. Anthony of Padua Chapel.
And where was that first held? Do you remember?
I remember exactly. I remember exactly. By then I had left my parents' home. I was off in the Navy.
Okay.
And the room that had been my my bedroom was appropriated and repurposed, and the furniture was moved out. The closet doors were torn off. An altar was put into the closet, facing out, and pews were installed, and that became a chapel. And the priest said mass there, first monthly, and then semi-monthly, every other week.
Some kids move out and go to college and they come back and it turns into mom's sewing room or dad's work room. But, rarely does it happen that the child's room turns into a chapel.
And not only, but the Blessed Sacrament was reserved there. So first I lived there, and then our Lord Jesus Christ lived there.
That's awesome. So society came 1981. And so how did that start to establish out? What was the initial following? How did that go? What type of...
It very quickly outgrew the bedroom chapel, and they began to rent a place first in a hotel, a conference-type room in a hotel, and then eventually a conference room in a bank building, and then eventually in the junior league building in Charlotte.
So while that's going on, obviously, moving into the 1984 indult, so apparently it was being recognized by Rome that there was a movement going on.
There was a movement.
Right.
And so John Paul II published his Quatuor ab hinc annos, the indult, that essentially made having the traditional Mass possible if you asked your bishop. And by then, I had moved back to Charlotte. A dear friend of mine, Marty Cuprice, God rest his soul, and my dad, God rest his soul, and I, and a couple other friends created an organization called the Society of Traditional Roman Catholics, who took it upon ourselves to gather signatures to have the Latin Mass here in Charlotte, in the Diocese of Charlotte, and thousands of signatures. We went to each diocesan church, gathered signatures, presented them to the bishop, and then Marty Cuprice actually took a bound book of thousands of signatures and presented it in person to Pope John Paul II.
Wow.
We did other things in the Society of Traditional Roman Catholics. We published a newsletter called The Catholic Voice. We published altar server training materials, and I've been essentially involved in the traditional movement since that time frame and before. We petitioned Bishop Donahue to have the Latin Mass, and so on the 10th Sunday after Pentecost in 1985, we had a sung Mass with Father Anthony Kovacic at St. Leo's in Winston-Salem, and then began to have monthly Masses at St. Vincent's. We're in the process of negotiating with Bishop Donahue to have a weekly Mass, and he had agreed that he would do that, and then something changed, and then we didn't, and then conditions began to be imposed, and it became very clear that we did not have a future with the traditional Latin Mass in the diocese, and that was 1987 timeframe. My family and I determined that we would cast our lot fully with the Society of St. Pius X and St. Anthony's. We continue to have, now we had a weekly Mass in a rented facility, and my wife and I essentially raised our kids to adulthood in the context of the SSPX. In 2000, actually, it was one of Virginia's sons, one of our mutual friend Virginia's sons, who discovered a church up in Mount Holly that was for sale. And we bought that church. So 20 years after the Society of St. Pius X got started in the Diocese of Charlotte, we bought that church up in Mount Holly, and we're still there.
Just across the river there,
Just
right?
across the river, as you're headed up 16. Yeah. And my family and I have thrown all our support to the SSPX. It is the only place we go to Mass now. Jason, I trained servers up there, and I know you did as well.
That's right.
So,
my path goes back, like I said, a little over maybe 25 years from finding about St. Anthony's and learning about the traditional Latin Mass and changing my life, seeking a vocation, of course, learning how to serve with you and your boys, teaching Latin, before Masses and things. We just had so much going on over there.
We did. In fact, my dad had served. Mass for St. Anthony's in the early days. As a matter of fact, he was the only server when they first got started. And then I came along and I served Mass for them for a while, and then started training servers. Then my oldest son and then my subsequent sons all served Mass. So my 4 sons served Mass for the society. And now my oldest son is training servers, and his son is serving Mass for the society.
There was never a lacking of servers, right?
Heavens no.
There was never
no,
never lacking.
Oh, and there can be, because we're doing a sung Mass every Sunday.
Absolutely.
So we have typically eight young men on the altar every Sunday.
Oh, and if you don't have anything to do, we'll find a torch for you.
Right.
It's like we'll find something for you.
We'll find something for you to
right.
do. So we're fully dialed in. I mean, I got another son who's the sacristan. Mm-hmm. We formed a Holy Name Society. One of my sons and I were founding officers. My wife teaches catechism. I teach adult catechism from time to time, lecture on Catholic history and the liturgy, and of course I'm thoroughly engaged with the Schola Cantorum. I took the singing that I learned singing out at Cibrelli's restaurant and Catholicized it. And
That's
so
awesome.
Founded the Schola and continue to sing with the Schola and direct the Schola to this day.
You're listening to The Obligation, sitting down with Jim DePiante. We'll be right back. This is Jason Murphy for the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas and the Obligation Radio Show here on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. This Lent, turn off the noise and turn on Catholic radio. Catholic radio is live and on the air at AM 1270, broadcasting from Belmont, North Carolina to the Charlotte regional area. Carolina Catholic produces more local content than most Catholic radio stations across our country. Tune in on air, online, on demand, and anytime at www.carolinacatholic.org. Make sure to catch the 2022 Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas replays each Saturday afternoon starting at 3 p.m. You can catch Keith Nestor, Tim Staples, Dr. Ray Garundi, our own Dr. John Aquaviva, and find out what the buzz is all about for the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas. Also, make sure to tune in to the featured men's shows on Carolina Catholic, Faith and Sport with Dr. John Aquaviva, airing on Mondays at 5 p.m. and on demand, The Remnant with Stephen Thomas, Bill Snyder, and Ray Haywood, airing on Saturdays at 5, and my show, The Obligation, which airs at 5 p.m. on Fridays. Catch all of these shows and more at AM 1270, on air, online, and over the app at www.carolinacatholic.org. Once again, this has been Jason Murphy. God bless, and Esto Vir.
Did you know that 90% of older adults wish to stay in their home as they age? Aging in place has many benefits. It tends to improve quality of life, which in return improves physical health. Also, retaining independence as we age is critically important to our mental health. Hi, my name is Meredith Stignan, and I am the president of Harmony Home Solutions and an active parishioner of St. Patrick Cathedral. We are your trusted partner for aging in place. We strive to enhance the lives of older adults and their families by providing premier aging-in-place and universal design lifestyle solutions that increase safety beautifully. Now is the time to get your aging-in-place plan in order with Harmony Home Solutions. Visit our website today at hhsclt.com. Again, that's hhsclt.com. Or give us a call at 980-220-8821. Again, that's 980-220-8821. We want to help you live an empowered and beautiful life.
And we're back. You're listening to The Obligation. My name is Jason Murphy. Today I'm sitting down with a good friend of mine, Jim DePiante. Jim and I have been talking about the traditional Latin Mass in the Diocese of Charlotte, the establishment of the Society of St. Pius X Chapel, St. Anthony's, and many different reasons of why he chose to veer off the path that the Church had begun to go on to with the Novus Ordo liturgy, and the changes stemming from Vatican II We're kind of getting into some interesting perspectives here. Wanted to talk a little bit. We've kind of been doing a bird's eye hovering view of kind of some controversy, conflict, and where things came from, but really to get down into the nitty gritty. I think for a lot of our listeners that may, and I would say typically don't really even know much about the traditional Latin Mass other than it's in Latin. If you ask an average Catholic about it, they will probably know that it's in Latin, and they probably say, well, we've heard that there's long liturgies and there's just a lot of pomp and circumstance, but really to understand the differences and what the points of contention are, I thought maybe we should go to that. In the Diocese of Charlotte, there's a huge following of traditional Catholics. The Charlotte Latin Mass community has been around for a while, and they have just a number of folks, following the traditional Latin Mass. Our seminary is booming, and a lot of those effects are due to the return to traditional formation and the understanding and teaching of traditional liturgy. So, Jim, I again, thanks so much for being here with us.
My pleasure.
This is great. This is really good information to get out there for our community. I ran across a quote here, and I want to read it to you and maybe get a little background, but I think it's pertinent. That being said, with we have this, so-called, the traditional Latin Mass community, in Charlotte, and of course many other dioceses. It's booming. Wherever you look, the traditional Latin Mass following is booming. But there's a saying, there's a quote here, and I think it's very pertinent. So I'm going to go ahead and read it, and then I want to get your reaction. What Catholics once were, we are. If we are wrong, then Catholics through the ages have been wrong. We are what you once were. We believe what you once believed. We worship as you once worshipped. If we are wrong now, you were wrong then. If you were right then, we are right now. Yeah. I hear you chuckling over there.
Yeah, I recognize it.
Tell us about...
I've seen this. I see it all over the internet. I've actually been sent pictures of bulletins from the SSPX in Cebu City in the Philippines. Wow. That originated in the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, and the man who originated it was Robert DePiante. That would be my father.
How about that? Little birdie told me about that one there. Very interesting. That's a great quote. I think many people need to maybe look that up, and think about those words there, especially relating to today and the kind of contention between the Novus Ordo and the traditional Latin Mass community. But anyway, moving along there, let's go back to the establishment of society in the diocese. It's growing in popularity, and I kind of look at it now, and it's almost like what goes around comes around. It's almost like we're again looking at what happened in the 1960s. There was something that was allowed for 1,500 years of church history, and then all of a sudden it was not allowed. And then it was allowed, and now it was
not allowed.
Yeah. So what's going on with that? What are some of the things, for our listeners who are not that familiar with the traditional Latin Mass, what are some of the issues that took place and that are still taking place, the abuses perhaps, to the liturgy and things going on?
So the abuses are abuses, and so you can find fault because of the abuses. But it's also fair to say that the abuses are abuses and they shouldn't happen. The difficulties go far deeper than the abuses. They touch on the substance of the new order of the Mass, the Novus Ordo Missae, as contrasted with the traditional Latin Mass. And so there are differences. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what are they and do they matter? Why do they matter? Well, there's a saying that those of us steeped in tradition are very familiar with, lex orandi, lex credendi. Latin is a very beautiful, exquisitely beautiful language. It's also wonderful because it's succinct. It says so much in so few words. So lex orandi, lex credendi literally means the law of praying is the law of belief. Now, what does that mean? What it means is what we believe affects how we pray, but how we pray affects what we believe. There are differences, between the new order of the Mass and the traditional Latin Mass. If the differences don't matter, why was it made different? I mean, that's a question we have to ask ourselves.
That's a great question.
If people say, well, the differences don't matter, okay, then why did we make it different? And what are the implications of those changes? These things were changed for a reason, and the differences reflect and affect what is believed, just like what is believed reflects and affects how the Mass is prayed. The two most prominent differences, if you had only ever experienced the traditional Latin Mass and you walked into the new Mass, the first thing you would say is, why is he facing outward? On the other hand, if you had only ever experienced the new Mass, the first thing you observe is,
why is he not looking at us?
why does he have his back to the people? Right there,
Exactly.
Right there tells you there's a problem.
Right.
And I want to make an analogy. All right, you go into a concert hall and you file into your seat. You go through the row. You sit down and you look up at the stage, and the musicians start to file into their chairs. You're facing them. They're facing you. And so there's obviously an interaction that's going to take place between you and them.
Right.
All right. All of a sudden, this new guy with special training, special qualifications, and a special mission and very special clothing
Stands in between you.
walks onto the stage. He bows to you.
Yeah.
And then he turns around and he faces the people that he's going to interact with. And nobody in their right mind would walk into a concert hall and say, why has that man got his back to the people?
That's a great point.
They would say,
That's a great point.
oh, this makes perfect sense because that guy with his special qualifications and his special clothing is facing that with which he intends to interact and interact with them on behalf of those of us who are sitting in the congregation. I mean, the audience. Okay? So the very asking of the question, why is he guy's back to the people, betrays a woeful ignorance of what's taking place. But that is the ethos of the new Mass, which is so evident in the old Mass, such that no one who goes to the old Mass exclusively would ever question why the priest faces, not away from the people, but faces the tabernacle, the real presence of our Lord, body, blood, soul, and divinity in the tabernacle, and the crucifix, because that is with whom he will be interacting. Because the traditional Latin Mass is very manifestly an interaction between the priest and God, not between the priest and the people. At times, Dominus vobiscum, he interacts with the people. Orate fratres, pray brethren.
Invitation, yes.
Ite missa est. He does interact from time to time. He steps out of the logical circumstances of the Mass, just like the conductor in an orchestra would turn around and explain a piece to the audience. The priest does during the reading of the epistle and the gospel in English, and then for his homily, turn around and face the people. But those things, in fact, are not part of the Mass per se. They're actually outside of the Mass. But during the Mass, he is acting in our behalf, facing the God to whom the Mass is being offered. So that's the first difference, the direction the priest faces. The next prominent difference, as you pointed out, is that it's said in English and not Latin. That is also very telling. The fact that it is in English and not Latin facilitates an interaction between presider and people, whereas in the traditional Mass, it's an interaction between the priest and God. The only way to characterize it is that it is very Protestant in its ethos. And people say, well, I don't speak Latin. I don't understand Latin. That's okay. God does.
Right.
The other thing that must be observed, I mean, you saw the movie, The Passion.
Yes.
I'm sure most of our listeners have. Most of us have quite forgotten the fact that there's not one word of English spoken in that entire movie.
Right.
It's in
Hebrew,
Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Latin.
Mm.
And yet we all watched it. We all enjoyed it. We lost sight completely of the fact that it's not in English because it had subtitles. Well, when you attend the traditional Latin Mass, you have what the priest is saying in Latin, and you have essentially subtitles. You have a missal that has everything the priest is doing and saying. You read along, but you read in English. His action is with an interaction with God. Yours is to follow what he's doing, to pray along, to meditate on the mysteries of the Holy Mass.
Isn't that that's a big point right there, that the praying of the Mass, because you do not get that sense
No, you don't.
in the New Rite.
No, you
do
don't.
not have the sense of you're praying the Mass.
No,
it's sort of you're being I participate in the Novus Ordo, so I'm just going to get that out there. I'm not against the Novus Ordo per se, but
it's a different ethos. It's a different ethos, and that can't be denied.
Yeah, absolutely. So you definitely miss that whole idea of praying the Mass. I think is something that is kind of forgotten.
It's kind of forgotten.
Yeah.
Even the terminology of the that's used in the Mass per se. In the traditional Mass, you have the notion of sacrifice. In the New Mass, meal. Sacrificing priest versus presider. This is the terminology that you see again and again. Altar as opposed to table.
Yeah, there you go.
The essence of the one is the New Mass is very anthropocentric, very man-centered. The traditional Mass is very theocentric, very God-centered. And this is not inadvertent. This was the objective in creating this essentially a new liturgy from whole cloth.
That's the big question, right? Isn't that the question that everyone's saying, well, why then? Why would the Church want to do this? I mean, was there good intentions? Was there good intentions that were hidden from a few with bad intentions, perhaps? I mean, what do you think? I mean,
by and large, I don't do conspiracies.
Right.
But the reality of bad actors cannot be denied. The reality that a lot of what eventually became the New Order of the Mass was not called for by the Second Vatican Council can't be denied. So I think it's a combination of taking some fairly legitimate reforms way too far, being motivated by what must be characterized and understood as bad actors that had infiltrated the Church. This is a matter of historical record,
right?
So I'm sure of that, and I think the thing that has probably suffered most as a consequence is the sort of the touchstone doctrine, the essential doctrine of the Catholic faith, which is the real presence.
And that,
of
unfortunately, is one of the biggest tragedies of Catholics when polled is that less than 0.5% even believe the real presence or would even know what you're talking about.
Yeah, last I saw of people who profess to be Catholic, fewer than 30% actually accept the de fide doctrine of the Catholic Church, that it is the real presence, body, blood, soul, and divinity. And this is reflected in the lex orandi, lex credendi, the language of and the behavior in the New Order of the Mass are not indicative of this real presence. The terminology of the Mass itself, it refers to the of God's presence in the gathering of the people. It doesn't refer to it as the real presence. The tabernacle is gone from the altar.
Right.
That made it prominent that this is an altar of sacrifice where God is present. There's just the Mass, the traditional Mass had countless signs, acts, gestures of reverence that the priest made that made it absolutely clear that the Mass was about the real presence of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. Those gestures of reverence for the Blessed Sacrament are completely missing from the new order of the Mass. Then things like communion standing, communion in the hands, lay ministers, women distributing communion, all of these things served to diminish belief in the real presence. As you pointed out, this is not speculative. This is not a theoretical thing. Well, if we do this, it's going to do that. Mm-hmm. It was speculation in 1969 when folks looked at it and it said, this is going to cause a deterioration in belief in Catholic teaching. It's real now.
Yeah,
it has
100%.
come to pass.
Yeah,
and it's absolutely empirical.
I don't know how you can look at the data and at some point you have to look at it from a scientific perspective and say this plus that equals that.
2 plus 2 still makes 4. I don't know. It's like what we tried didn't work, and the answer is, well, let's do more of the same. or it was badly applied. No, it was applied exactly as intended.
And prior to Vatican II, there was no allowance for deviation from the liturgy. It was very strict. And the priest was held to a very high standard in that respect, right?
Absolutely.
It wasn't open for interpretation or cultural, improv or whatever.
It was all prescribed. Mm-hmm. Every last bit of it. Every movement, every gesture of the priest. And the reason for that, the Mass being liturgical prayer, the priest ceases to be himself when he puts on, if you will, the liturgy. He takes on the persona of Jesus Christ. Yeah. And through humility and strict obedience to what is prescribed, he now removes himself entirely from what's taking place, and he puts on Jesus Christ and acts in the place of Jesus Christ. And so now the Mass is not you, me, and Father praying. It's Jesus Christ offering himself in sacrifice to the Eternal Father. Now that ethos is nowhere present in the new order of the Mass.
You're listening to The Obligation, sitting down with Jim DePiante, talking about the differences between the traditional Latin Mass and the new rite or Novus Ordo rite as prescribed after Vatican II, and we'll be right back.
The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
Hey everybody, my name's Bill Snyder. I'm one of the hosts of The Remnant, along with my good friends Stephen Thomas and Ray Haywood. And we are so very blessed to be able to broadcast this hard-hitting men's show on the Carolina Catholic Media Network every single Saturday at 5 o'clock p.m. This show offers perspective from 3 different generations of men, and we tackle tough topics. But the amazing thing is, while we're hard-hitting, we never leave you angry and always hungry for more. So I hope you listen to us. You can tune in a variety of ways on air at 1270 a.m. in the Charlotte area. You can also follow, friend, and like us on social media. You'll be able to find our social media channels available to you by searching for Carolina Catholic Media Network. There's also a wonderful app on both the Apple and Google Play stores. You are able to download it. Just search for Carolina Catholic Media Network, and you will find us and our podcasted versions of the show right there in the app. We hope you tune in, and as we always say, may God bless you and your families.
"2022 is bringing many new and exciting changes to our Carolina Catholic Apostolate, built to communicate how to better learn, love, and live our Catholic faith. We begin with our name change to Carolina Catholic Media. This reflects the expanded scope of Carolina Catholic Radio to include the development of our podcast, streaming, social media, YouTube, and direct marketing platforms. 2022 is a very important year for the Catholic Church. As a result, Carolina Catholic Media will feature more local news, information, and conversation to reflect what's happening now and how it impacts our local Catholic community. Throughout the year, Carolina Catholic Media will showcase our Catholic schools and homeschools, the Charlotte Diocese 50th anniversary, and the 2-year worldwide synod process that begins on the diocesan level. We encourage you to get involved, join us, and catch the spirit. The Carolina Catholic Media Apostolate is a 501c3 nonprofit. We are 100% funded by you. Please consider a donation, monthly tithe, or business sponsorship to support our mission and vision to spread the truth of Jesus Christ and our Catholic faith across the Carolinas. Thank you for discerning a role in our apostolate. May God bless you abundantly.
And you're back listening to The Obligation on the Carolina Catholic Media Network. So glad you're here. Sitting down today with Jim DePiante from the Society of St. Pius X Traditional Order. And we've just been discussing a lot of the differences between the Novus Ordo rite and the traditional Latin Mass rite. I've been going through just different points regarding the emphasis of the presence of God and some of the directions of the priest facing, the language used, and so many different differences between the two. And coming upon another question we have, regarding the music. For me, the music is a big sticking point, and it can really kind of slice the faithful right down. You can kind of, guys aren't involved with the music. That's one of the things I noticed. Well, guys, number one, unfortunately, are not involved with their faith very much as they should be, and they're letting it be something that the wife or the female in the relationship kind of, that's just the woman thing to do, take care of the faith side, and I take care of the monetary side and the providing and the security and things like that. But unfortunately, that is not true. That is the exact opposite of what it should be.
Right,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So, our faith has to be first. But, speaking of the music, it's been such a feminization of the music. And guys don't sing along with that. I'm sorry, you don't. And a lot of the music,
of course, they don't.
comes out of the 80s, and it's very free-flowing. And it's, where else do we do that? I mean, there's a few radio stations where you can go and it's going to play some classic rock, and it's going to play that, but you rarely are going to hear them kind of intertwine. But unfortunately, with the Mass, we're still carrying the music from the 80s, which is really just dead. I'm sorry.
Come on. You took the splendor of Gregorian chant, and you, with its amazing pedigree, the exquisite poetry, and the use of the Latin language, which is uniquely well adapted to be sung, and replace it with these uninspiring and insipid little ditties in English. And then you replace the grandeur of the organ. I mean, the greatest of instruments with the banality of a 12-string guitar, or the bombast of, God help us, a praise band.
Yeah,
that's a Protestant.
And there's just a merging. There's a merging of so many. I was telling a story
that makes no sense.
A few weeks ago where they were chanting, the Agnus Dei and Solemn Tone Kyrie, but then we're singing On Eagle's Wings, and the priest is playing the guitar from the altar, and it's like, what is this? Man. So it's, talking about the music and the feminization of that. And then we talk about, we haven't really got on this yet, but I know, the serving of girl altar servers. that if you want to see a cutback in vocations, and you want to see young men and boys flee from being at the altar, fill it with girls. Guaranteed it'll have it. There's an amusing
story right here in the Charlotte Diocese. I got a phone call from a young lady, years and years ago. And she said, Mr. DePiante, I would like to learn to teach and direct Gregorian chant, because I want to teach children here in the Diocese of Charlotte how to sing Gregorian chant, and so I need to learn how to direct it. Can you help me learn that? I said, absolutely. Come see us sometime. So she came up, and we had some conversation about how to do this, and she called me a few weeks later, and she said, this is not working. I said, of course it's not working. She said, I can't get the boys to sing. I said, of course you can't get the boys to sing. And I knew this would happen. She said, what do you mean you knew it would happen? I said, because it always happens. I said, you want the boys to sing, you got to separate the boys from the girls.
That's right.
And she said, how come? I said, because the boys don't want to sing if the girls are singing. The boys don't want to serve if the girls are serving. And so they all disappear. So now you got girls on the altar, and now they're fantasizing about how they're going to be priests. How messed up is that?
Well, they're not the only ones. There's a lot in the church hierarchy that think that's coming down too.
So she called me back a week later, and she said, Problem solved. I cannot get the boys to stop shouting the music. Well, of course, no surprise. But anybody who understands how men's heads work understand that that is exactly what should have been expected.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. It's so true. It's just there's a different place for different folks that we're called to. So, would you say that there's a different theology?
I don't know how to come to any other conclusion, Jason. That sounds strong, but I can give you some for instances, okay? The ethos of the Novus Ordo Mass is that there's a presider presiding over an assembly. I mean, that's words right out of the documents that promulgated it. That's right out of the ceremony itself. The traditional Latin Mass is unmistakably a sacrificing sacerdotal priest acting in persona Christi on behalf of the people. In the new Mass, there's an interaction between presider and people. In the traditional Mass, there's an interaction between the priest as Christ and God the Father. In the new order of the Mass, it is presented as the narration in the present of an event that took place in the past. It's like telling a story, and it refers to it as the institution narrative, the institution of the Blessed Sacrament. In the traditional Latin Mass, it is the representation, the making present an eternal reality. This is such a fundamental difference. It needs to be understood. It needs to be explored. The language of the new order of the Mass, a commemorative meal at a table. Traditional Mass, a sacrifice on an altar. New order of Mass, the Last Supper, narrated as a meal. The traditional Latin Mass, the crucifixion and sacrifice of the cross. And it is the Last Supper, but in a very, very different way. Consider that at the Last Supper, our Lord took bread and, fully alive, with his body and blood, integral, created his body when he consecrated the bread. This is my body. Consecrated the wine. This is the chalice of my blood. And so now you have this living man who has his body and his blood created on the altar of the table of the Last Supper, separated from each other. And the way this works is when a human being has all of his blood removed from his body, that man is dead. Dead, dead, dead. Jesus Christ, living, breathing, created himself on the table of the Last Supper, dead. Within 24 hours, that same thing exactly would happen on the cross. Jesus Christ, now fully, all of himself, body separated from his blood, dead, dead, dead on the altar. There's no question the ethos, the theology of the traditional Latin Mass is, yes, it's the Last Supper, but not as a meal, but rather it is the same death of Christ that took place at the Last Supper, that took place on Calvary, on the cross, takes place on that altar. That ethos is absolutely evident as the traditional Latin Mass. It's missing. It's missing from the Novus Ordo Mass. The Novus Ordo Mass is a Protestant-style prayer and praise as worship. The traditional Latin Mass is Christ sacrificing himself to the Father as worship. That's a completely different kind of worship. The Novus Ordo Mass is the priesthood of the people. The traditional Latin Mass is the sacerdotal, the sacrificing priesthood. It's a very different mindset. Again, this idea of what is the focus? The traditional Latin Mass is utterly theocentric. It's about God. The Novus Ordo Mass, priest engaged with people, anthropocentric. It's essentially a glorification of man, and it comes at the expense of the glorification of God. There's no escaping the fact. Lex orandi, lex credendi, they're different. They're absolutely different. They reflect differences in belief, and they affect belief.
So what would you say to those that say, well, if you do the Novus Ordo ad Orientem, that would be facing the altar away from the people in Latin, as prescribed by Vatican II, what would you say to those that say, well, why can't if we do it this way and we cut out the quote unquote abuses or the interpretations, what would be the meat of the matter there? Or is that getting deep there?
No, not at all. So ad orientem is important, necessary but not sufficient. Okay. Still, the language of the Mass, the terminology of the Mass, the ethos of the new Mass, even when the priest is facing the altar, it's still called a table. It's not called an altar. He's still a presider, not a sacrificing priest. So you can change a few of these things, and they're modest improvements. But I mean, I hate to even say it, but you can put lipstick on a pig. You can.
Yeah.
It doesn't change what's going on underneath.
Yeah. We talked about the interiors and the exteriors, and how, for me, prime example, a bruised and battered 21, 22-year-old, living no life of faith, walking in and acknowledging just from a natural perspective the holiness and the reverence in the traditional Latin Mass, and having been brought up, in the Novus Ordo my whole life, and never been struck with such beauty and reverency that they just, the Novus Ordo exudes something of the exterior of the kind of worldly, the gathering, to your point, whereas the traditional Latin Mass, it just exudes of otherworldliness.
Sanctity, otherworldliness,
right?
Absolutely. Transcendence.
So definitely a lot to cover there. I don't know if we'll have time today to get into the finite details of, the prayers that were changed, the calendar was changed.
Everything was changed.
The language was changed,
Right.
But back to your points here. Moving towards the Mass as a sacrifice, the real presence, the sacerdotal priesthood, the male priesthood. That's something that these days is not.
It's not up for grabs, folks. I mean, you can talk about it all you want. It ain't happening.
Yeah. So there's those in the hierarchy that are really not even following that, and speaking about the catechism not even being finite, that it's subject to interpretation these days, and it's just a complete mess.
These are a consequence of changing the way we worship. It changes what we believe, and they reinforce each other. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you go talk to a traditional Latin Mass Catholic over at St. Anthony's right now and ask them questions about the faith and about the Mass, you're going to get a set of answers that seem in every respect to conform to the traditional teaching of the Catholic Church. If you go ask a typical Mass-attending Catholic in the Diocese of Charlotte right now, you're going to get different answers. How can that be?
Yeah. It's interesting looking at the political spectrum today and seeing how those in higher up are trying to take, especially our nation, in a direction that I would say most do not agree in. Contrasting that of the time in the 60s when society was kind of pushing for this, right? We were kind of pushing our politicians to take us into this new frontier. And in the process, the church was wrapped up in that. And now we have a similar situation, yet opposite, thinking of St. Paul, the image of, looking in the mirror and the image looking back at him. And now we're here, and we have our current political environment, which is completely, it's different than what it was. The people are not wanting it; they're kicking back. The people are done with where the politicians are going, and now we have a church that, for some reason, seems to be wanting to go in that same direction, and yet the people do not.
The people never have, though. The
faithful do not want this,
and they never did. It's
becoming increasingly louder and louder. So I think we're going to have to kind of start wrapping up, but, kind of the conversation that brought us here started, regarding some of the restrictions that were coming down from Rome on the traditional Latin Mass, and those have precipitated down to the cancellation of the Triduum here in the Diocese of Charlotte. I've heard, I keep hearing rumors that there's a lot of folks that may not just kind of just end up at the Novus Ordo Triduum this year. I'm hearing some may go take the ride across the river, and
down by the river.
That's right. The mass down by the river. Right.
We're gathering. We're lining up for it. We expect to have a fair number of folks visit, and we're getting it together.
Yeah,
expecting that. Absolutely. And by the way, we welcome you.
Yeah,
we welcome you.
So how will that start off? What will Holy Week look like over at St. Anthony's this year?
Well, it starts with Palm Sunday, the traditional procession of palms, the thumping of the door with the foot of the cross, the angels singing from inside, responding to the people singing outside. We enter the church with our palms. We will sing the exquisitely beautiful and very long tract, after which we will chant the Solemn Passion in 3 parts. So we'll have the Chronista, the narrator. We'll have the Christus, the singing of the part of our Lord.
Right.
And then we'll have the Synagoga, singing the shrill parts. And there it's very beautiful how it's done, because it's the Christus sings in a very deep, beautiful, mellow voice, and the Chronista just sings
Eius, right?
Crucifixe Eius.
Yes, it's very moving. It is.
It's wonderful. So we'll do that. And then Holy Thursday, we'll have the Mass of the Last Supper. Then we'll have the stripping of the altar while we chant the Psalm, Psalm 21. Then we'll have the Altar of Repose, and then the Solemn Afternoon Liturgy of Good Friday, and then the best bonfire in Christendom. We're still doing that. We have amazing Easter fires.
Absolutely.
It's a point of pride.
Well, first there's the Alleluia Man, which goes away. Right?
That's been done.
And then for Easter, Paschal Fire. That's always a big event. You can see that from miles away. That's a pretty big one. Yeah, we have a event coming up. The men's conference, Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas, just went out with a message about the pilgrimage.
The 7 churches.
The 7 church pilgrimage, yeah.
Right,
and you've done that in Rome, right?
Did that in Rome. That's actually a practice that started. It's a pilgrimage to the 7 major basilicas of Rome. So St. Peter, St. Paul outside the walls, Santa Croce, the Lateran Basilica, and I think St. Sebastian. And there's 7 total. St. Mary Major.
So in a small way here in the Diocese of Charlotte over the past 10 years, a small group of guys have been getting together and doing that. And it's a marathon. I had a buddy one time, and he would get mad at me at every church because he just sat there and wanted to kind of, go into his deep prayer. And sure enough, after about 5-10 minutes, I have to go tap him on the shoulder. He's like, we got to go again? No, this is a journey. This is a journey.
It is. It's a journey. It's a pilgrimage.
It's a pilgrimage.
That's what it's intended to represent. By the way, the practice of doing that began in Rome, but the practice of doing it within your diocese is old.
Yeah.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I think you end up at the cathedral.
We do. So we're going to.
So that's typical.
We've been meeting at the cathedral to start, so we don't actually spend time at the cathedral
initially.
So after Holy Thursday Mass, our Lord is processed into the altar of repose, and then we take our little journey down Park Road. We hit St. Anne's and St. Vincent's. Back to St. Gabriel's, out to St. Matthew's, over to St. John Newman, over to St. Thomas Aquinas, and then we loop all the way back.
All on foot?
No. Well, and we were in our vehicles for sure. Yeah, this is still a 3-hour journey, even in our cars.
Even so.
Wow. But it's amazing. It's exhausting, but it's amazing, and never had anybody say they didn't enjoy that. So I dragged my son with me a couple years, and he really enjoyed that. So I invite anyone who wants to do that. We're going to be meeting at St. Patrick's Cathedral at the Family Life Center at 9 p.m. after the Holy Thursday liturgies. And, knowing that we've got one down there in Mount Holly, we might try to squeeze in 8 this year.
8 stops, so we'll be there waiting for you.
Well, Jim, I really appreciate you coming on, and man, we have a ton more to talk about. So I highly anticipate having you back on here, and we'll dig more deeply into the traditional Latin Mass and liturgies and everything else about it. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll definitely talk soon.
Great. Thank you kindly. God bless you.
And God bless you. Thanks a lot. If you enjoyed this episode and have any questions or comments, or would like to come on the show and discuss your faith walk or any issue regarding the Catholic Church, send us an email at feedback@theobligationshow.com. You can also catch all of our previous episodes and all of the shows of Carolina Catholic Media at www.carolinacatholic.org. click that donate button and we'd greatly appreciate it. There are also many opportunities to sponsor the show, the radio station, and the Catholic Men's Conference. Join Sensus Fidelium, Harmony Home Solutions, and Wallach Investments, who have pledged their funds to help keep Catholic radio on the air and relevant. Sensus Fidelium is a collection of Catholic homilies, apologetic videos, and other resources to grow in one true faith. They can be found online at www.sensusfidelium.com. Wallach Investment, LLC is a strategic moral investing firm committed to placing their clients' interests ahead of their own. Their mission is to be a force of good in their relationships to make the most of their clients' investment, giving them the time and confidence to pursue their mission. Contact Daniel Wallach at www.wallachinvestments.com for more information. For the Obligation Radio Show, the Catholic Men's Conference of the Carolinas, and the Carolina Media Network, my name is Jason Murphy. God bless, and Esto Vira.